Portland City Councilor Dan Ryan. Welcome to the second Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee meeting of 2026. I'm happy to be joined today by committee colleagues. We have Multnomah County Commissioner Megan Moyer. There you are. Thanks for being here, Commissioner Moyer. City-appointed community member Charity Kreidler, county-appointed community member Felicia Tripp, and city-appointed business community representative Dan Floyd. I'm also joined by the amazing Portland Children's Levy staff, Erica, Joel, John, Meg, Katrina, Brian, Yuxing. You're all here, right? Thank you all for joining us today as well. Now on to our agenda. First up, as always, let's approve the minutes from the January 27th, 2026 meeting. And I'm sure you all saw the minutes, and I'm asking now for a motion. So moved by County Appointed Member Felicia Tripp. And second?
Second.
All right, Dan Floyd second. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, that passes. So we're on to item number 1, which was a review of the small grants funding process. First, grants manager Erica Bridgman, community engagement manager Katrina Peterson, and community council member Alex Sanchez, and also Meg McElroy will update us on the small grants funding round. Thank you all for being here today, and we look forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Okay, for the record, I want to introduce the team who will be providing the presentation today. So I'm Erica Bridgman, Grants Manager at PCL. Joining me today is Alex Sanchez, a member of PCL's Community Council, which helps shape the entire large and small grants process. And Katrina, Community Engagement and Policy Coordinator, who staffs and facilitates the Community Council. And you all know Meg McElroy. This afternoon, our presentation will include the following information: key steps in the small grants funding process, including Community Council's funding recommendations, data on the small grants applicant pool, an overview of the process used for Community Council's funding recommendations, and then Meg McElroy will join us at the end of the presentation to help facilitate the allocation committee through discussion and voting on the small grants funding decisions. Okay, great. Before we get into our formal presentation, we want to thank everyone involved in the small grants process. The applicants, our community council members, who are all volunteers, our allocation committee, which includes both elected officials and volunteers, and members of our staff who have supported development and implementation of the process. We want to recognize that all applicants for PCL grants are doing important work and are valued for the ways they serve children and families each and every day. We want to acknowledge that competitive processes are difficult and can create a range of feelings. We want to honor and appreciate the time, energy, and effort of the applicants in this process. We launched the application last fall, and they have been gracious and patient, and we thank them for participation in the process. As we start today, we want to review the small grants funding process key steps and timeline, which are outlined in this visual. The top light blue bar shows actions that applicants have taken. So you can see when the application opened, the applicant testimony, and then when grants would start in July. The middle orange bar shows actions related to recommendations and decision-making by allocation committee, community council, and city council. The bottom dark blue bar shows actions that staff have taken to develop and facilitate the funding process. The green arrow highlights where we are today, the allocation committee's funding decisions. As part of this presentation, we'll look more closely at the work that occurred between December and March on this timeline. After today's discussion by the allocation committee, the entire package of grants will go to City Council for consideration in April or May. The dates are still being confirmed. Under this timeline, Staff hopes to begin grant negotiations with small grants recipients in mid-May and June, with grants beginning July 1, 2026. PCL's Community Council and Allocation Committee shaped the small grants process this time based on feedback from applicants and reviewers involved in PCL's 2020 small grants process. Strengths of the previous process were having both a written and interactive component to the application, and community reviewers' involvement in recommending applications for funding to PCL's Allocation Committee. Areas for improvement focus on simplifying the interactive piece for all applicants. In 2020, the small grants process had a two-step application, and only those moving to the second step had the opportunity to do the interactive component, which was an interview. The interviews were time-consuming for staff, applicants, and reviewers, and they proved difficult for the reviewers to score. So, based on these lessons learned, PCL continued a short, written component to the application, included the interactive component by asking applicants to complete a short, basic 5-minute smartphone video, and continued community reviewer involvement in the form of community council members, rather than a separate cohort of community reviewers to review the videos. And also developed a process for community council to select applicants to recommend for funding. The next slide. Thank you. We want to ensure for the record that applicants and the public understand the three groups with different roles and responsibilities in the small grants process. PCL's Community Council advises staff and the Allocation Committee on the design of the funding process. They met in public meetings over the past 3 years to advise the Children's Levy community engagement process and funding priorities resulting from community input, and on application questions, scoring criteria, and review process. For small grants specifically, they also scored the video component of the applications, which you'll hear more about shortly. They also met in February to recommend small grants applications to the Allocation Committee for funding. The Community Council is a newer group to PCL. It was formed in 2022 in response to community feedback. The Allocation Committee is responsible for all funding decisions, including allocations of PCL's resources and design of the funding process. The committee is required by ballot measure authorizing the levy since the levy began in 2002, and with each of its 4 reauthorizations. The Allocation Committee meets in public meetings to consider advice and recommendations from community council, staff, and public testimony. They decide all aspects of PCL's funding processes, and they decide on which applications to fund and grant amounts. As part of the levy's legislative requirements, grant decisions made by the Allocation Committee must go to the City Council for final approval of the entire package or remand of the whole package back to the Allocation Committee to redo the process. If Council finds that the Allocation Committee did not follow its requirements to make funding decisions in a public meeting based on application scores and other community conditions to foster a balanced and integrated citywide system of services. Okay, next slide. Now that we've reviewed the overall funding process and phases and groups responsible, we'll look more at the small grants applicant pool and the steps leading to Community Council's funding recommendations. First, we offer context for this current small grants process compared to the previous one, which was our first one in 2020. PCL launched these small grants at that time in response to community feedback. The purpose of the small grants is to increase access to PCL funds for smaller nonprofits and to strengthen their capacity to serve children, youth, and families. The grants focus on increasing opportunities for children, youth, and families in neighborhoods or schools with unmet needs. The grants are for specific program services and are not for general operating support. We've seen growth in interest for small grants from when they were made during the pandemic in 2020. For this current small grants process, PCL received 55 total applications. That's a 77% increase over the first funding round. PCL plans to make 12 small grants, which is a 71% increase over the first funding round. PCL received applications requesting a total of $10.4 million over 3 years, which is more than double the amount requested in 2020. However, the ratio of demand has remained approximately $4 for every $1 requested. PCL has $2.5 million to grant over 3 years for small grants. This is an increase compared to the $1.5 million the committee had originally planned. That's because in December of 2025, the city economist updated PCL's revenue projections, and PCL will have about $6.5 million more in projected revenue over the next 3 fiscal years. The allocation committee voted unanimously to add $1 million to small grants, bringing the total to $2.5 million over 3 years. This is a 150% increase in funds available for small grants compared to 2020. Based on the grant amounts requested and staff capacity, PCL can support up to 12 small grants. Keeping in mind the overall funding process, steps, and timeline we reviewed earlier, we'll now look more closely at the steps leading to the funding recommendations for the committee's consideration today. This slide helps explain the small grants application scoring process. PCL published the small grants application on its website and Web Grants, the city's online grants platform, on October 15th, 2025. As we said, the application included 2 components, which was the written questions focused on the organization's experience with children, families, and youth, their proposed program services, and their annual grant budget. The second component was a smartphone video of up to 5 minutes, which addressed the applicant's unique strengths. This was an opportunity for them to tell the story of their program more conversationally. All applicants completed both components, and all scoring criteria were listed in the application. Reviewers also completed training on anti-bias and intra and inter-rater reliability, understanding the scoring criteria, and completing scoring forms and web grants. The review and scoring process occurred in December through January. 3 PCL staff scored the written component, and 9 community council members scored all videos. The total score on each application was the sum of the average of the 3 written scores and the median of 9 video scores. Among the 12 reviewing staff and community council members, 67 identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, 33% identify as white, 33% identify as LGBTQIA2S+, and 25% identify as having a disability. A total 76 points were available for an application. Up to 48 points were from the written component, and up to 28 points from the video component. Applications scored between 39 to 68 points total. The median score was 54. Many applications received the same total score. For example, 2 applications received the same highest total score of 68. Another 2 received the score of 63. Another 2 received the score of 60, and 5 received the score of 59. This table shows the total small grants applications received and their total 3-year funding requested in each of PCL's 6 program areas. As you can see, we received the most applications in the after-school program area, which comprises over 40% of all applications and all dollars requested. The slide also shows the number of applications that scored median or higher by program area. Among the 33 applications that scored at median or higher, over half were in the after-school program area. In sum, we saw the highest demand in the after-school program, and most of these applications scored at or above median total score.
In preparation for making recommendations, staff provided Community Council with descriptive data on each application, including scores, the total, the written and the video, program area, and PCL funding priorities. Staff created 3 policy frameworks to help the council consider applications to select for funding, especially in cases where applications have the same total score or scored only 1 point apart. Each of the 3 frameworks contained 15 applications. The frameworks were score order. Using only score is a typical approach in grant making and/or funding processes. After school focus. This program area had the greatest number of applications overall, and most applications have scored at or above the median. This trend is consistent with other historic patterns at PCL, likely because there are minimal other resources for after-school programming. The final framework was balanced by program area and funding priority. PCL has multiple program areas and funding priorities. As a reminder, funding priorities are the types of services Portlanders prioritized in community engagement. Staff wanted to offer a framework that addresses a range of needs and provides a variety of opportunities across the age spectrum that PCL serves, including across community engagement priorities. Across all frameworks, staff prioritize score and score order. Score is important because it reflects both the video component and the written component of the application. For the 2 frameworks that don't solely follow score order, staff used factors such as PCL program areas, community engagement priorities, video score as a way to lift up community voice where applications had similar characteristics and/or the same total score, and trying to create differentiation amongst high-scoring applications between the 3 frameworks. As a reminder, staff did not ask Community Council to choose a framework. We provided the frameworks to Council as ways to think about and make selections across the variety of applications, including those with similar scores. This slide shows a visual of how the frameworks compare by program area. Each framework's 15 applications are represented as a portion of each bar on this slide, according to their program area. For example, the score order framework and after-school frameworks had more after-school applications compared to the other program areas. The balance framework had more of a mix across the program areas. These frameworks were meant to help Community Council consider policy trade-offs, such as, do you want to consider applications at only a certain score and above, and why? Or do you want to emphasize one or some program areas more than others, and why?
During our February 23rd meeting, Community Council received an electronic ballot with all 55 applications. The 9 council members who scored video applications each voted for 12 applications out of those 55. The first round of votes resulted in 11 applications selected and a tie amongst 3 applications for 12th place. Each of those 3 applications received 4 out of 9 votes. A second round of voting was used to break the tie and focused only on those 3 that had tied for 12th place. And the second round of voting resulted in 1 application receiving 5 of 9 votes, 1 receiving 4 of 9, and 1 receiving no votes. In general, Community Council prioritized total score on the applications. Applications recommended for funding scored at 59 and above. Some applications that tied for 59 were not recommended. On our ballots for voting, members were asked which factors influenced their votes, balancing across program areas, prioritization of a particular program area or funding priority, or other. Of the 9 members voting, 7 said that score was highly influential and the other factors were less influential. A list of the recommended applications is available at portlandchildrenslevy.org/events and linked to today's meeting agenda for those tuning in virtually and available as a handout to those attending the meeting in person.
On March 3rd, PCL staff sent individual funding recommendations to each applicant, along with a guide explaining the recommendations and instructions for submitting optional written testimony to the Allocation Committee. Staff also sent those recommendation materials to the Allocation Committee. The individualized communications sent to applicants were created in response to feedback that we received after our large grants process last spring. Previously, on February 13th, the Allocation Committee received the materials on the full applicant pool, including links to all of the videos. Each applicant, as I said, had the option to submit written testimony in support of their application between March 3rd and the 17th. They could submit up to 400 words in any language to support their application. Testimony was submitted in support of 25 out of the 55 applications that we received, and staff compiled and provided that testimony to the Allocation Committee members on March 19th. This table shows the amounts for the recommended for the 12 grants that Community Council has recommended for funding by PCL program area. That's the second column that you see in the table. So PCL staff, not the Community Council, determined the funding amounts per recommended application. We used the 3-year funding amounts requested by the applicants. If fully funded, the requested amounts for the 12 recommended applications totals $2,550,000. This would be $50,000 over the current $2.5 million allocation for small grants. However, PCL is able to cover this due to higher than projected compression offset payment from the Parks Levy received in February of 2026 since you last met, and that was in the amount of $69,000. This table provides additional context on the Allocation Committee's projected funding ranges of resources for the large grants among all of PCL's program areas. So that third column there was something that you all set in June of 2024 prior to making large grants funding decisions, and so that you could think about how to allocate the resources across our program areas. Those were based on your policy priorities and historical funding demand in each program area. The fourth column shows the percentage of total resources allocated in the large grants by program area after your funding decisions were made in the spring. Child abuse prevention, intervention, and early childhood had the highest portion of large grants funding, each at 19%. The last column here shows the allocation percentages by program area if we were to combine all of the current large grant funding with the 12 small grants currently recommended by Community Council and the funding amounts for those. These data suggest that no matter which applications the Allocation Committee selects for small grants, big picture, are unlikely to come close to the 35% limit on a program area that is set by the act governing levy operations. So I'm sharing this to let you know you're in good shape with not coming up against that ceiling. The table also shows that small grants funding would be unlikely to change any program area much more than 1%. This table shows application demand in both small grants and our previous large grants by the PCL program areas. It shows how the small grant applicant pool there in the second column compares to the 12 grants recommended by the Community Council, the third column. The table is in descending order by the number of applications received in small grants. The table also provides context on last spring's large grant applicant pool and grants funded, including total grant applications received there in the fourth column and total applications funded there in the last column. In both the small grants and large grants, after-school and mentoring program areas had the highest number of applications. Some program areas, such as child abuse prevention, intervention, and foster care, had higher rates of large grant applications funded compared to other program areas like after-school and mentoring. The number of applications overall funded in the large grants was in alignment with the allocation ranges that you all had set for the program areas as shown on the previous slide. So this concludes our presentation on process, and before we move on to item 2 on the agenda, we want to offer you the opportunity to ask any questions on process and before we get into decision making.
Thank you so much, team, committee members. It's your opportunity to ask questions.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Why the split between staff and our community council? Why one watched the video and the other, that part? I didn't realize that, so.
Did the written applications? Do you want to?
The written applications were a lot more materials than the video applications. They included the program budget, which staff is in a better position to be able to evaluate how that works. And because all of our community council members are all volunteers, watching 55 5-minute videos is a much lighter lift for them than reading 55 written applications and doing the videos. So we were also trying to balance their time.
Thank you.
Okay. Looks like we're good. Commissioner, you're fine? Okay. All right.
All right. In that case, I will move on to helping facilitate you all through decision-making. Okay, sounds good. So in advance of today's meeting, each of the allocation committee members received summaries of all the applications submitted, including the videos, application score, the funding priorities addressed by the proposed program, the funding recommendations, and the testimony submitted by applicants. And after they reviewed that information, after they reviewed that information, we asked you to, we provided you with an Excel workbook to prepare your individual funding preferences across all 55 of the applications. And we also asked you to prepare sharing your own reflections on your preferences today, and we'll invite you to share those shortly before we begin discussion and voting. Based on the individual preferences that you all put together and sent to us, we aggregated those preferences to help facilitate discussion today. So we'll start your discussion with the highest scoring application where you have similar preferences on the recommendation. We will take a vote with each application. So the chair will call for a motion and a second and discussion, and we'll proceed in this way. Discussion with each application, with discussion and each application based on score in descending order, focused first on applications where you have similar funding preferences. Then we'll move on to applications where you have different funding preferences, and any applications where a member indicated an extension, but so far no one has indicated the need to abstain. Our approach will flow as follows. We'll say the name of the applicant organization, the number of committee members out of 5 who indicated a preference to fund that application, the funding amount, and whether anybody abstained, but so far we don't have any of those. Then we will turn consideration of the application over to the chair to facilitate the voting process as I just described. Also, our fiscal analyst, John Kelly, will use a spreadsheet to track your decisions as you make them, so he'll help us stay updated on the balance. So far, no committee member, if no committee member indicated an interest in funding a particular application, it is not planned to be discussed today. As a reminder, the list of applications recommended for funding by the Community Council is available at portlandchildrenslevy.org/events and linked to today's meeting agenda for those tuning in virtually and available as a handout for those joining us in person. Any questions on the facilitation process? Okay. So the last thing, I just want to remind the allocation committee members that they are required to disclose conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest refers to a financial relationship between a committee member or their immediate family member and the applicant organization. A financial relationship includes being an employee or a contractor of an applicant organization. If you volunteer at an applicant organization, you're not required to disclose that as a conflict. You may disclose your connection if you choose. Committee members with conflict of interest will abstain from voting on applications where they have a conflict. If anyone has a conflict of interest with an applicant organization, please state the conflict now and again when the application is considered for voting. Seeing none, we'll move on.
Commissioner Moyer, we cannot see you right now, so if you want to, there you are. So just, now you're going to be, she'll be on the screen the rest of the time.
We can
When
see
we
her.
put up slides, that's when we miss her.
Oh, got it, yeah. Okay, so the first, the highest scoring application where you, all 5 of you expressed an interest in funding it is the family room. 5 out of 5 of you expressed a preference for it, and all of you had a preference for funding it at the recommended amount of $240,000, which was the amount requested by the applicant. Call for a
We
motion.
vote on each one?
That was my proposed
Oh, okay.
process. If you
Okay,
preferred to do a
got it.
different.
I thought we were going to do the whole enchilada. So, okay. The family room, all those in favor? Aye. Aye.
The second application that you all expressed a preference, or individually expressed a preference for, is Kindness Farm. Again, the amount that each of you indicated a preference for is the amount that the grant applicant requested, 100, and was recommended, which is $140,000.
Okay, this time, let's be really kind and gentle. So if you're in favor of this, can you go like this with your head? All right, everyone do that if they are. Okay.
I'm realizing I have a mistake that I made. I meant to ask you all for your rationale and your reflections before we got started on voting. And Charity's nodding her head. So I want to pause the voting for a minute
Okay.
because all of you spent a lot of time thinking
Yeah.
about this and you had thoughts prepared and I went too fast.
Okay, we have voted on 2. Are you okay with that? Okay, so let's go ahead and start this open-ended discussion. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Charity, as indicated. I want to come with a few talking points today to provide background to folks about how I came to the decisions I did, and that it was a process facilitated by a lot of people in the room. I do support all 12 recommendations, and that is because I trust the process that produced them. And I want the public to understand the rigor that goes into a competitive grant process like this one. Erica alluded to that earlier. As I did in the large grant round, I met with PCL staff members multiple times, connected with my fellow colleagues in the allocation committee, and even attended previous community council meetings to understand the process. And I reviewed all the materials multiple times, including applicant videos, written testimony, and scores, and community council recommendations and vote results. So my confidence in the thoroughness of this process is high. The lens I use throughout is primarily prevention and early intervention and meeting the needs, unmet needs of as many populations across Portland as possible. And I saw that in how the allocation of recommended funding was dispersed across different geographic locations in Portland. So that distribution mattered to me. And testimony stood out to me when it reinforced specifically how funds were going to be used. In videos and written testimony, I looked for applicants to be very specific about what they plan to do with the funds. For example, one applicant cited data about students meeting grade level reading benchmarks, and they proposed to double that rate with the funding that PCL would provide. And another applicant identified a concrete barrier, which is very common, lack of transportation, and described exactly how those funds were going to be used. I also looked for program area distribution that reflects the applicant pool, and I looked at both the large grant demand data for context to just make sure that the small grant round was supporting and filling any gaps that may have not been addressed in the large grant round. And this included the child abuse prevention funding in the large grant. And I just want to end with, to the organizations not funded today, I reviewed your videos and written testimonies. The stories you shared and the impact that you have in your communities is encouraging at a time when we need to uplift one another more than ever. This was a competitive process with limited resources that require discerning choices. The rigor applied to these decisions was out of respect for the work that you do and the communities that you serve, and not indifference of it. Those are my thoughts on how this came to be. And it's a months-long journey with a lot of thoughtfulness among PCL staff, community council, and the allocation committee. And I really want to make it very clear how seriously I take that and that my colleagues take that.
Thank you so much, Charity. Anyone else like to offer?
Well, I'll just add a little bit more. I don't want to add too much more than Charity already added, so thank you, Charity. Great job. I had questions for staff when we met, and they were around like how much money is available to be sure, and how much money should be in reserve. Have we planned for a rainy day? You know, what happens if we don't have enough? Staff adequately answered all of those questions, and there's not plenty of funding available, but there is enough in reserves to account for any issues that may evolve later. And then just pushing back a little bit on staff as far as our capacity to fund the amount of grants. Obviously, when you see the quality of the applicants and you review them, you want to fund all of them. You want to have $10.4 million to fund all of them. We cannot do that, and so of course we got to push on the other side to staff have the capacity to do more. And possible, like I said, it sounds like we may discuss an alternative moving to 13, but you are at capacity, and you explained that well to me. So I don't think there's more than we can do. I'm thankful for all the applicants. There's excellent testimony. I also took into account the optional written testimony. I think that's important. I'd like to see how people respond to an additional step or adversity if they are not funded. Also, how they show gratitude if they are recommended for funding. So I thought that was important as well. And then lastly, I'd say that the 5 that finished at 59 that was a difficult discussion. I wanted to fund all 5 of them. I asked the question about how we can divide the funds and fund more at a lower amount, but we set a threshold, we set a minimum that we needed to follow, and also again, staff capacity, adding three more grants to manage was not real. So I appreciate all the answers that I received and the work that the staff and everybody has done through the process.
Thank you, Dan.
I don't want to add too much more, but as someone that's been a big advocate to create the small grants process to begin with, I, like Charity and Dan, reviewed all the information, but just for my own due diligence, I took it one step further. I went to everybody's websites. I went to everybody's 990s, if they had them, because I had to do my financial due diligence in this time as well, and to see how they portrayed themselves in the community. And I have to say that I struggled in this round, and staff knows, just like Dan, with not the top, but who scored 59 and 58, and really doing my due diligence with those particular applications. And that, I just wanted the public to know that was an extremely difficult process for me. And so I felt in order to do right by especially those applicants, I had to double down in my due diligence. And I also talked to Charity about it, and we also went round and round. And so we want everybody to know, yes, this is a competitive process, but we also want people to know that did not get funded, we want you to come back. You know, and there have been many people in large grants, small grants, that have not been funded in the past that have come back and have been funded. So we want to encourage you to not let this be the end for you. We think that please, please, please come back as well. And I too support the 12 recommendations that were presented to the allocation committee.
Thank you, Felicia. Commissioner? Thank you, Commissioner Moyer. Colleagues, first of all, thank you so much. I'm really glad that we stopped and paused. Thank you, Charity, for getting us back on the right track here. I concur and ditto much of the behavior that went on. I will give Felicia some gold stars for the 990 digging. I assume that staff digs through 990s and financials, but I shouldn't assume. So I've always found digging into 990s to be very telling. And so thank you for going that extra mile. As Meg knows, because we were on the phone a while on this, mine didn't match up perfectly. When I got down to the 59s, I struggled. And big picture, I think I would continue to ask the question, we choose to fully fund what they request. And some grantors don't do that. They do partial funding. So much of our conversation was about partial funding, especially as we got down a little bit on the numbers. And so we had some delightful dialogue about that. And I think that where I landed with approving the 12, because I do think you made a capacity argument that landed with me. I'm a big believer in that. You have to do what you do well, and not spreading yourselves too thin, and that's where we see more mistakes. So I think that argument did land really well with me. I want to thank you, Meg, for staying in that conversation. That said, we had some dialogue about just this morning, as we both reflected, so I appreciate that as well, that because these are smaller organizations, sometimes it's there's more vulnerability to the actual award being implemented, and maybe there was one that could withdraw eventually. And last time we had an alternate, so we had a conversation just this morning about proposing an alternate that could be pre-picked, if you will. So I wanted to pause there in real time with you. This isn't rehearsed, to find out what we could do in regards to that. Did that make sense, colleagues? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So what I would propose is let's put a pin in the alternate because, but let me back up. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to prepare the reflections that you all did and all of the work that you have done to come here today for these decisions. We're grateful for that. And I know the applicants and the community council are too. And I want to apologize for not starting us off right with that set of reflections, because that was what we planned and intended. And I apologize to you all and to the applicants and folks who are viewing here. That was a little bit of a rough start. I take responsibility for that. Before we proceed to the conversation about an alternate, I think that it might make sense for you all to continue to go through the applications where you had, where 5 of you agreed that it ought to be funded, you're in agreement with the recommendation and the funding amount, and then we can get down to the place where there are, from my understanding, 2 applications where folks have questions and where you can have some discussion about the alternate. Does that sound like a good path forward? Salud.
Thanks. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Then just to review from our rocky start, the Family Room and Kindness Farm have already been voted on by the committee. Okay. The next application, again, we're going in descending score order, where 5 of you expressed a preference to fund at the amount the applicant requested is Active Children Portland for $240,000.
So approved, so moved. Everyone's nodding their head. Okay.
Councilor Ryan, would you want me to go through the list until we get to the 12 and then get to?
Well, I think what you have is pure agreement on the 12. I think the conversation will be when we get to the alternate.
Right. For the record, I'm going to go ahead and read the remaining 12.
For the record, and for the record to move smoothly, I'll just say so moved as we nod heads.
How about if we make it even more efficient, and when I get to the end of the 12, I'll ask you all
and
to
just nod heads one time?
You can take a motion.
Okay, got that. Good. Thank you. I like that better.
So the next one is the Center for Black Excellence. 5 out of 5 of you expressed a preference to fund that at the amount requested for $240,000. Next is the Somali Empowerment Circle. Again, 5 out of 5 of you expressed a preference to fund that at the amount requested of $240,000. Next is the African Refugee Immigrant Organization. Again, 5 out of 5 with a preference for the amount requested of $240,000. Next is NTICO. 5 out of 5 of you with a preference to fund it at its amount requested of $120,000. Next is Wonderfolk. 5 out of 5 of you with a preference to fund it at its amount requested of $225,000. Next is Project Lido. 5 out of 5 of you expressed a preference to fund it at $240,000, the amount requested. Next is Word is Bond. 5 out of 5 of you expressed a preference to fund it at the amount requested of $240,000. Next is People of Color Outdoors. 5 out of 5 of you expressed an interest in funding it. And one of you was thinking about reducing this to make space for a 13th grant, but I can assume that 4 out of 5 of you wanted to fund it at the full amount requested of $180,000.
And that would have been me, and so we had the conversation about moving towards an alternate, which appeased me to be an improvement.
So what I'm hearing is that 5 out of 5 of you are interested in funding this at the amount
I
requested.
just didn't edit before the meeting.
No problem. $180,000. We're doing it on the fly, and we can. And then the last one of the 12 is We Belong PDX, and 5 out of 5 of you expressed an interest in funding that, and at the amount requested of $210,000. So do you want to take a motion then, Counselor?
Yeah, we've just heard the 12 that were approved, and we heard the details. So we're going to move to approve this funding. All those in favor, nod your heads. Okay.
Right. Okay, so I saw no opposed. Okay, so the next 2 applications that had been identified by at least one council member are Love is Stronger GV and Friends of Baseball. And one of you expressed an interest in Friends of Baseball, and Love is Stronger GV was under consideration due to it having come in second place to the tie-breaking vote that Community Council did at their February meeting. So with that, I will open the floor to discussion, and we are prepared to answer questions.
Well, I can speak to Friends of Baseball. I mentioned that because I found their number was the same. The original vote was compelling. I thought the materials they sent in were great. I did look up their website. I'm seeing their impact, and it gets into that mentoring space as well. So I saw it as, was it under after school, but I thought of it as mentoring as well, in my opinion. So that was one that I was looking at getting partial funding to, and then in our conversation, I was comfortable with accepting the truth that this is a granting organization that wants to provide professional development, technical stewardship throughout the grants, and therefore managing capacity is, I'd say, different than some, and I respect that. And so I accepted the argument of staying at 12, but I then today said I would advocate for this being considered an alternate.
I'm the one who said to consider Love is Stronger only after reading the minutes from the community council and then going back to the applications. And so one of the things I want to acknowledge is the great work and volunteer hours that the community council puts into this, and to read their debate over this. So that was one of the reasons I considered it, but I don't have the same sort of rationale that our commissioner here has, but I really wanted to also honor the community council when reviewing the materials.
Would anyone else like to comment? This is an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I can comment on Friends of Baseball for sure. I was, besides for what you said, I was moved by the written testimony as well. I thought Aaron Dixon responding with additional feedback and his upbringing and lived experience and how he benefited from programs in Portland was impactful. I also know the organization, in a way, I've said this, using the word baseball may not always be the best thing to do because it sounds like it's one thing. But similar to an organization using food as an opportunity to have to address hunger relief, it leads to a conversation about education or sustainable housing or whatever else may lead to that person or family experiencing needing hunger relief. I think with this Friends of Baseball, it's a tool to connect with children, to teach them about history and diversity and arts and movement and so many other things that I think it does more than just be a friend of baseball. It may have started out that way, but it's a tool to do a lot more. So that's why I looked at 59 too and saw the organizations in there, especially that organization. I thought, how do we divide the money? Well, we can't, but I could certainly support them as an alternate.
Without everything in front of me, I can't speak strongly on one or the other, but Love is Stronger stood out to me. Probably biases I have about the communities being supported, as in needing more support and not typically getting it. But I don't, without being prepared to talk about that, I don't want to try to go into detail as to why, but that one was one that stood out to me in the video in particular. And I mean, I'm going to be honest, sports don't, like my own personal bias, funding after-school sports doesn't get me as excited as a lot of the other programs, and that's not, so I wouldn't take into consideration my viewpoint on that.
But to respect the community process, and since they were so closely tied between to having the alternate, the organization that got 4 votes would probably make my preference.
I'm pausing. We could do a couple things. We could delay this to the next meeting, knowing that you're like, that's not a good idea.
No, you can.
Not the entire thing, just this alternate.
Right, just
Yeah.
the alternate. We can, and then the alternate has to be a separate ordinance to go back to city council for approval, or
Now let's back that up.
Or you can revisit the alternate discussion at your next meeting in June. And by that point, assuming things go as we have mapped them out and hope they go, we would have a clear sense, I think, if one of the 12 selected were maybe going to be more unlikely to be able to do it and whether an alternate is needed. So you could wait and see where we are at that point. You can make the decision at that point, and then we have to go to council in the event that becomes an actuality, like if another applicant drops out and we need that alternate, or you can make that alternate decision now and it can be approved in the ordinance with these packages in advance, so that if one of the 12 is unable to do it in the next couple months, we don't have to come back here and then go to council. So you have sort of options about how you want to proceed with it. I think big picture, if it's not part of today's package and you eventually want to do it and it becomes an eventuality because one of the 12 isn't able to use their grant, then it will all have to go through, it will just take a little bit more time.
Yeah.
I think that's the point.
So you all know where I'm coming from here. I think the practice of having an alternate going forward would be a good practice. I also think the staff should consider what partial funding looks like. And I understand that goes against the demands of capacity to manage the accounts. But the first one I'm more attached to, I do think that it's wise to have an alternate for the small grants. But I don't think it's urgent today to make that decision because it's a solution that's looking for the problem that doesn't exist at the moment. And when I listened to all five of us, there wasn't enough clarity for us to make a decision today without having more reflection time and more information and know what we're actually making a decision on. And I'm not a big advocate on the council when we bring walk-on amendments, so I don't want to experience that here. Usually there's regret sometimes when you rush things such as that. So that's just me free-flowing right now on what I listened to.
I was just going to offer, if it's helpful, Counselor Ryan, that I do have a lot of information and data here before me. So if you had specific questions or you wanted to hear the summaries of either of the two organizations, applicants who are being discussed, I would be happy to share that with the dais. So.
I'll get out of the way. We'll hear from others.
I like Meg's approach of if we need to do that, I think we should do it in June. So, and that way, Commissioner Ryan, we actually create an alternate process so that everybody in the community knows and we're transparent of what that looks like as well. And so that's just my recommendation. So we stay accountable to the community as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just, to be fair, with everyone involved, want time to look things over again and understand what the implications are and have a agreed upon process, and come prepared to discuss it in June. I would feel better about that.
I think we're all on the same page. 3 of us are so far, but you're there too? Okay. And Commissioner Moyer's nodding her head.
Okay, then to clarify, I'm hearing that the 12 that you all decided will go forward for city council consideration, and the proposal for an alternate is tabled until the next meeting.
Correct.
Got it.
And we think it's not just for this, but it's a practice that we should have a process that we can all discuss and agree upon in June.
Sounds
right?
good. Got it. All right. All right. Any further questions on that?
Okay, so I think we're on to the next item, correct?
Yes, we are on to the next item.
This is item 3.
Item 3, next steps.
Okay, finally, Meg will review next steps regarding city council approval of the allocation committee funding decisions. And Meg can remind us what comes next with the large grant decisions that we made also in January.
Yes. So for everyone who's listening to this meeting and tuning in about the small grants, the next phase is that we go to City Council for consideration of the allocation committee's decisions. That is a requirement under the levies authorizing legislation. The specific, as you heard in this presentation, the specific consideration that council gives is whether to approve the entire set of grants or send it back to the allocation committee to redo the process. Similarly, this committee made a decision in January to increase our current large grants by 8% based on learning about projected revenue increases in December. That package of decisions also has to go to City Council for their consideration, and their consideration in that case is to reject the entire package of increases or to accept them. So just to clarify for those listening, there is not a line item sort of grant by grant decision power that council has. Their responsibility is to make sure that the allocation committee is doing its job with process. And particularly, as Erica said earlier, that they're making decisions in a public meeting based on score and creating a balanced citywide service system. So in terms of next steps, that's procedurally what council's role will be. Staff will be learning soon, we hope, about the confirmed dates by which we will go first to a council committee. Council committee will hear a presentation and then decide whether to move the presentation forward to full council. Presentation being these two sets of decisions, the small grants and the large grant funding amendments. And then once it goes to full council, it has a first reading and a second reading. And that is hopefully all going to happen in April and May. Any questions on that?
I'm a little attached to this one. So on the small grants, you will not have the entire council go over one by one. It'll just be all 12 presented, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
The second one, can we be reminded again what exactly the action was and the rationale to make that decision? In other words, as you can recall, it's all a little fresh. There was some challenges in terms of getting that passed last time, and there could be some that could see our decision to fund it this way, to put the coffers back into those funded. I just want to hear again the rationale that we were all persuaded and convinced of that the staff gave us in our decision in January.
Absolutely. So at the time, you voted to invest $5.2 million over the next 2 years into our existing large grants. They are currently at $65 million over 3 years. And so that 5.2 will be spread over 2 years for those 94 grants. So roughly $2 million a year. It comes out to 8% on their current 3-year awards. It allows them to support COLA and rising costs. It stabilizes services for the children and families they served now, where many of those community-based organizations are facing local, state, and federal funding cuts. It also mitigates the impact of the lesser amounts of funding that they received when these grants are made. You all may remember that we were facing a 21% decline in revenues at that time, so this little bit of increase mitigates some of that. And many of those grants that were made did not receive the amount of funding that they had requested. So this 8% gets them just a little bit closer to the amount that they were wanting. You all decided against revisiting the 74 unfunded applications from that past process. There's no clear process currently by which to reconsider those 74 applications. Among the unfunded applications, most of them scored below median, and several were discontinued due to previous past performance with their PCL grants. Additionally, due to the 5% administrative cap on the children's levy, staff do not have capacity right now to design a process to revisit those 74 applications. Instead, amending current grants puts resources into our community as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. Requiring us to design a process to revisit those 74 unfunded applications would significantly delay resources getting to children and families. So those were the main reasons.
Well
Councilor
said.
Ryan.
And I think that was important for me at least to hear again. And when you work with the counselors as this comes to the committee meeting, I would suggest that you definitely deliver that message. I think everyone's well aware of, at minimum, healthcare inflation. So I really appreciate that we went back and revisited. I know it was not that long ago, but it feels like it was back in January. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions regarding this conversation? Yes.
Just a quick follow-up. Thank you. That's very helpful summary. And just as far as a tool for our city council members, do you have a one-pager, more to do, summarizing when they go to this next meeting in April or May, the points that you've just listed about how the decision was made and why going back to the drawing board is not a good option.
Yeah, I mean, it's longer than one page, but yes. So,
They seem to like short. So
yeah,
it's just-
we're preparing for giving a presentation at the committee
Yes.
level, and that presentation includes what I just reviewed
Yes.
with you, as well as, it will include this small grants funding process that we reviewed today. It will it will include how you all arrived at your decisions on small grants. It will include how the levy had increased revenue projections in December. It will include how you all made decisions in January about those resources, including what I just went over with you. And separately from that PowerPoint presentation is a memo that walks them through all of that information as well. And then there's formal paperwork like a city ordinance that authorizes these things. There's a little bit of background in that document as well. And then there's another document that we have to complete called an impact statement, and in there is a little bit of this information as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And just also, well done on whoever in your staff is doing all the infographics for visual
Brian
people
did that.
like me. Yeah, it's nice to have those quick visuals to then have the thicker summaries and supported by something that you can kind of quickly just look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Okay, I think that covers that minute. And in fact, I think we're at the end of the meeting.
I think that's true.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today. Please join us for our next meeting. It's on June 16th. And agendas for future meetings will be sent to the Levy email list, shared on Facebook page at PDX Kids Levy, and posted on portlandchildrenslevy.org. We welcome your participation. If you would like to join the next meeting or comment on agenda items or the work of the levy, visit portlandchildrenslevy.org and join our email list. The meeting of the Allocation Committee is now adjourned. Thank you. That's really cool. I don't know. I think I got a paper cut. It's like one of those. And I don't know what So glad we had that conversation this morning. I knew we were going to talk about the 59.
Thank you.